at Kiwi Magazine. I'm so excited to introduce our presenter for this evening, Amy McCready. She's the founder of Positive Parenting Solutions and the author of If I Have to Tell You One More Time, the revolutionary program that gets your kids to listen without nagging, reminding, or yelling. Something we'd all love the answer to, I'm sure. Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that once Amy wraps up her presentation, we'll have time for all your questions. If a question comes up for you now or during the presentation, just feel free to type it into the chat box at any time, or you can type it in during the Q&A portion after we announce that. Okay, so enough for me, and I'm going to turn things over to you now, Amy.
Thank you so much, Mary Grace. Everyone, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm so delighted to have the opportunity to work with Kiwi, and so excited to share this information with you tonight. Now, as I am, moving forward, ladies, my screen is not moving ahead for some reason, so I'm not sure if I have the controls or not. For those of you joining us, just a quick little technical snafu. Sometimes that happens. Oh, there we go. Well, let me start with a promise. My promise to you for tonight is that you are going to walk away with from this session with concrete tools and strategies that you could begin using tomorrow with your kids and begin to see results. I want this to be a great use of your time. In terms of our agenda, we're going to talk about why kids really misbehave. We're going to dig a little bit deeper. And then I want to share a formula with you for the 5 R's of fair and effective consequences. I think you're going to love this. And as Mary Grace mentioned, I'm going to be answering your questions. So a lot to cover, but we will get it done. One quick comment I'll make to you is if your control panel is sort of distracting to you, there's a little orange arrow that I believe will shrink your control panel if you don't want to see that, but that's up to you. I notice it's covering up the slides a bit, but we'll just keep on going. Well, now as we are, oops, there we go. I am also the mom to 2 teenage boys now. I can't believe that. It just kind of happened overnight. I have a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old, so we are right in the middle of teenage chaos, but it's actually a ton of fun, more fun than I ever really thought it would be. But I wanted to show you this picture of my kids when they were little. Back when my kids were in preschool, I was very much the yelling mom. I didn't want to be the yelling mom, but that's kind of who I had turned into. And I had this life-changing moment one night where I had tucked the kids into bed, and I thought, you know, I kind of feel like I'm getting sick. My throat hurts. It's really scratchy. And then I realized that no, I wasn't getting sick. The reason my throat hurt was because I've been yelling so much. And I thought, how in the world did this ever happen to me? The 2 people that I love more than anything in the world, here I am yelling all day long. So it was kind of a very low point for me, but it was really the best thing that ever happened because that's how I got started in my study of positive discipline strategies, and many years later founded Positive Parenting Solutions. But the reason I tell you that story is that if you ever feel like the yelling mom or the yelling dad, I really want you to know that you're not alone, because I hear this story from parents everywhere I go. And it's a vicious cycle. It kind of starts out by asking your kids to do something in your best mom or dad voice, but you don't get any response. So of course, what are you to do? What are you left to do but repeat yourself, and then remind and repeat and remind, repeat, remind, repeat, remind. And of course, we all know where this is going. Eventually, you just lose it and have that big adult tantrum, and you start with the, you know, if I have to tell you one more time, or how many times do I have to tell you, and on and on and on. And then, of course, after that big adult tantrum, we feel like the worst moms or dads in the world. And now, from our kids' perspective, we're totally the bad guy. Well, my vision for you and for every parent that I work with is I want you to not even be able to remember the last time that you raised your voice. I'm not promising that you'll never ever yell, but I want you to have to think really long and hard about the last time that you yelled, because you had a toolbox full of strategies and you knew just what to do. So let's talk a little bit about how to make that happen tonight. Before we can get to the point where we're not yelling, we have to understand why kids really do the crazy, annoying things that they do. So I want to start with a couple universal truths. And these are based on the foundations of Adlerian psychology and positive discipline. The first one being that kids have a hardwired need for belonging. Remember that term, belonging. What that means to your kids is that they need to have an emotional connection. They're just hardwired to be emotionally connected to you and to their siblings. Even in the classroom, they need to have that emotional connection with their teacher and their peers. However, part of that emotional connection with you comes from having plenty of positive attention. So think about your kids as having an attention basket. Every single day, they have to have plenty of positive attention in their basket, because if they don't, they are going to get your attention one way or another. And as you might expect, it's going to be with negative behaviors. So they will use negative behaviors like whining, clinging, helplessness, interrupting, dragging the bedtime routine out forever, because it really works to get your attention. When kids whine, we pick them up and we give in to whatever they're whining about just so they'll stop. So the behavior works for them, and that's why they keep doing it again and again. This is another important concept to remember. Kids continue doing what works for them. If a behavior gets your attention, positive or negative, they're going to keep doing it because it's working. Now, another one of those universal truths is that kids have a hardwired need for significance. Significance to your kids means feeling capable, having a sense of autonomy and independence. They need to contribute in meaningful ways, and they need to have some sense of control over their own lives. We refer to this as positive power. But think about it from a kid's perspective. They feel like we call all the shots, we're making all the decisions, we kind of boss them around, that, again, from their perspective, so they don't feel like they have a lot of control or power over their own world. And just like with that attention basket, if our kids don't have positive opportunities to have control over their own lives, they're going to get power any way they have to. So you may have tantrums, mealtime, bedtime, potty battles, backtalk, ignoring, refusing to cooperate, sassy attitude, and eye rolling. Anybody who has experienced that knows how maddening it can be. Well, guess what? When you get frustrated and angry and annoyed and they get under your skin, that is a huge hit of power for your kids. And just like with attention, kids continue doing what works for them. If the behavior gives them a hit of power, if you get bent out of shape or upset, it is a big power win. Basically, their behavior is saying, you may think you're the boss of me, but you're totally not. Kids will get their power one way or another. So said differently, if you are seeing repeated patterns of behavior, whether they be attention seeking or these power behaviors that make you so frustrated you just want to blow a gasket, that means it's working for your kids, because they wouldn't keep doing it if it wasn't working. So this hardwired need for belonging and significance, belonging being that positive attention and emotional connection, significance being that need to contribute, to make a difference, to have some control over your own life, those are universal truths. They are non-negotiable. It's like gravity. Kids have to have it, and if they don't, they will typically use negative behaviors to try to get what they need. What we have to remember is that misbehavior is not the problem. We think it is, but it's not. It's a symptom of a deeper issue. So that misbehavior is trying to tell you something. So I want you to kind of think about that. If I'd come over to your house tonight and ask your kids how they perceive their sense of belonging and significance, what do you think they would say? So just think about that this week, and where we can give our kids a little bit of a boost. Now, I want to share with you a formula for the 5 R's of fair and effective consequences. This is one tool in our Positive Parenting Solutions toolbox. The toolbox actually has over 25 positive discipline tools. I barely have time to cover one of them with you tonight, but I do want to cover consequences because it's the one that parents most often want to know about. And this formula that I'm going to share is appropriate for kids over the age of 2.5. So they have to understand basic cause and effect, and they have to be verbal enough to go through this process. For kids under the age of 2.5, we would use a different set of tools from the toolbox. So anytime we're using consequences, they must include the 5 R's. So the first of the 5 R's is that the consequence must be respectful. needs to be respectful to the child, needs to be respectful to the adult. So that would not include yelling, screaming, humiliating, anything that would involve what we call blame, shame, or pain. That would not be respectful, and most importantly, it's just not helpful, because when kids are experiencing that blame, shame, and pain punishment, they just shut down. It's kind of like talking to a brick wall, because they shut down in a kind of a self-defense mode. So if we keep our consequences respectful, then the child is open to listening and learning, and you're going to have a much better result. So the first R is respectful. The second R is that the consequence must be related to the misbehavior. If you're taking notes, put a big star beside this one, because this is where parents most often miss the boat. They kind of pull this willy-nilly consequence out of the air, but very often it's not related to the misbehavior. It needs to be related so that it makes sense to the child, and that learning event takes place. It's connected. So for example, the related consequence for not wearing a bike helmet is you don't get to ride your bike. The related consequence for not brushing your teeth is that you don't get to eat sweets or crackers or goldfish or bread or anything else that's going to turn to sugar on your teeth. I can't force you to brush your teeth, at least not without a power struggle, but we'll have to adjust your diet. If you miss curfew, you don't get to go out with your friends the next weekend, and if you don't turn off the video game when I ask, then you're going to lose your video privileges. So the consequence must be related to the misbehavior, so it makes sense, and so that learning event takes place. So our first two R's are respectful and related. The third R is that it needs to be reasonable in duration. Consequences don't have to be crazy excessively harsh. For a 4-year-old who's throwing puzzle pieces around the room, packing away that puzzle for a day is perfectly appropriate. For a 14-year-old who's texting at the dinner table, having him lose his phone privileges for a week would be reasonable and appropriate. So just keep it reasonable. So after respectful, related to the misbehavior, reasonable in duration, the fourth R I really want you to pay attention to. It is so important. It's probably the most important one in terms of whether or not this is going to be successful for you. The fourth R is that the consequence must be revealed in advance. It must be revealed in advance so your child has the opportunity to make a choice between the appropriate behavior and the consequence. When she knows ahead of time what you expect and what the consequence will be, then she has the power. And I'm going to give you an example of how that works in just a minute. So the consequence must be revealed in advance, but we want to close the loop with the fifth R, which is having them repeat back to you. So just so we're on the same page, can you repeat back to me what our rule is and what the consequence would be for not following the rule? When she repeats back, then we have that verbal agreement. Everybody is on the same page and we all know what to expect. There will be no surprises. And this repeat back to you, this formula can work with kids, as young as 2.5 or 3. Of course, we're going to use very simple words all the way up to your teenagers. It works like a dream. Now, let me give you an example of how we would use the 5 R's. Remember, it has to be respectful, related, reasonable, revealed in advance, and repeated back to you. So let's use an example for video games, because younger kids, older kids play video games, but sometimes they don't always turn off the video games when you ask them to, and that can be a big source of frustration for parents. So let's assume that your kids are playing video games and they're having a big old time, but it's almost time to eat dinner. And so you go into the family room and say, hey guys, I need you to turn off the video games because it's almost time to eat. And then you go back into the kitchen, you're getting the rest of the food on the table, you look around, and guess what? You're the only one there because your kids are still playing video games. You can just feel your blood pressure start to boil because this is like the umpteenth time that this has happened this week. And so you go into the family room and blow a gasket, that big adult tantrum that I talked about earlier. How many times have I asked you to turn off those video games? That's it. You guys have lost your video privileges for the rest of the week. And then you start packing up the controllers and turning off the PlayStation, and of course your kids are like, oh, that is so unfair, you're so mean, this is the worst house I ever lived in, and all kinds of drama. Well, We want to avoid that drama from happening. So let me kind of replay that movie for you as if we had revealed the consequences in advance. So the first thing we're going to do is in that moment, stay calm. As hard as that is, you go outside, get a big breath of fresh air, go into the family room, turn off the PlayStation and say, guys, dinner is served. You're welcome to join us, but the kitchen closes at 6:30. And that's all you're going to say in that moment. Now, of course, they're going to want to eat. So but they're going to come to the table, you're going to have dinner, and then towards the end of dinner, you're going to have a little conversation about consequences. So you're going to start very calmly by stating the concern or the problem. And all you have to say is, I've noticed that we've been having a little bit of an issue with video games. It seems like when I ask you to turn off the video games, either you ignore my request or there's a whole lot of grumbling and groaning. And, that's not okay because, of course, having video games is a privilege, and there are responsibilities that go along with that. Now, two things here. I started the sentence with, I've noticed. That's a very disarming way to start the conversation. I didn't say you never listen to me or you always ignore me, because that for sure would have invited a power struggle. So you start with, I've noticed, because it's very disarming and it's very much kind of a problem-solving mode. And the other thing is, if you could see my face, I have this smile on my face. Even if it's fake, that's a really good way to start the conversation, because nobody has to get defensive and you can just talk about solving the problem. So the first step in the process is state the concern or the problem. Next, you're going to let them know what you expect. So guys, in the future, my expectation is that when I ask you to turn off the video game, I expect that you will turn it off and without any grumbling and groaning. Now, I'll give you a 5-minute warning so you can save your game, but I'm not going to give you any second chances and I'm not going to give you any reminders. It's up to you to turn it off. Now, that sounds pretty reasonable, don't you think? However, this has been a little bit of an issue for us in the past, so we're going to cover our bases and reveal a consequence. So I would say, now I'm sure we're not going to have any issues with this. However, if you choose to ignore my request when I ask you to turn off the video games, or if there's any grumbling and groaning, I need to let you know that you're going to lose your video game privileges for the next week. So now they know what I expect, and they know what the consequence will be if they choose not to follow the rule. But again, I want to close the loop with the 5th R. So I'm going to ask them to repeat back to me. So just so we're on the same page, guys, can you repeat back to me what our rule is for video games and what the consequence would be if you choose not to follow that rule? Once they repeat back, then everybody is on the same page. It's a beautiful thing. The great thing about this process is that now the monkey is on the child's back. And what I mean by that is she will decide whether or not she gets to keep her video privileges. If she follows the rule and turns off the video game without any grumbling and groaning, well then everybody's cool and she gets to keep her privileges. If not, she has made that choice. Now, I want to cover one other quick thing before I get to questions, because this is important as you begin to implement it. Let's assume you go through this process and it is going swimmingly for 4 or 5 days, but then your kids make a poor choice and don't turn it off when you ask. What are you going to do? Well, you're not going to get all bent out of shape. You're just going to recognize that this is a great learning opportunity for them. And you're going to go ahead and implement the consequence. All right? But you're going to implement it with dignity. And what I mean by that is no blame, shame, or pain. So what you don't want to do is say, well, Mary Grace, you knew what our rule was. You knew that if you didn't turn off the video game, you were going to lose your privileges. So don't get mad at me, young lady. Can you feel that I told you so attitude coming through? That is big time piggybacking, big time blame, shame, and pain, and I guarantee you, you will be right back in the middle of a power struggle and you will be the bad guy. We don't want that. We want your child to take responsibility for his or her choice. So instead of doing the whole piggybacking thing, you're going to just say, gosh, I see you chose to lose your video privileges, but this is a learning opportunity and I have confidence you'll make a better choice next time. Let's go through that again. I see you chose to lose your video privileges, but I have confidence you'll make a better choice next time. Isn't that so much more empowering? They still don't like the fact that they lost their video privileges, but there's no yelling, there's no blame, shame, and pain. It's just, gosh, this is part of growing up. We all mess up, we make mistakes, but this is a learning opportunity, and I have confidence you'll make a better choice next time. That puts you on the same team as your child. And so often kids feel like we're working against them rather than being on their same team. We've still been very clear about the rule. We've followed through each and every time, but it doesn't have to involve blame, shame, and pain. Your child can take responsibility and learn to make a better choice next time. Now, even though you may go through this entire process with, revealing in advance and having them repeat back to you and all of this good stuff, you implemented the consequence with dignity, you might have a giant meltdown. That could be a tantrum on the floor. That could be a lot of verbal, that's not fair, you're so mean, I didn't remember, or stomping up the stairs and slamming the door. In any case, I don't want you to get worked up about that meltdown. Recognize that it has 3 purposes. Number 1, it is intended to express her dissatisfaction, but that requires absolutely no response from you. We get it. She's unhappy about it, but that's okay. Number 2, she's trying to get you to change your mind. Are you going to do that? No. You've gone through all this hard work, revealing in advance, repeating back, implementing the consequence with dignity. You're not going to back down. Or she's trying to suck you into a power struggle, and we're certainly not going to go there. So just ignore the meltdown. As long as your child is safe, not in danger of hurting herself or anybody else, you just walk away and let it happen. I promise you that may happen 2 or 3, maybe 4 times, but pretty soon she's going to realize, you know what? This behavior doesn't work. Remember I said kids only do behaviors that work for them? So we want to make sure that negative behavior doesn't work for your child. It works like a dream. Now, I have gone through that so fast. I'm sure you probably have a lot of questions. I would love to answer your questions, so feel free to send those in. Again, this process, this formula works for toddlers as long as they're verbal and they understand basic cause and effect, all the way up to your teenagers. So at this point, Mary Grace, I'm happy to answer any questions that have come in so far about this process.
Great. Well, Amy, thank you so much for sharing all of your insight and advice. I'm sure it was really helpful. It was really helpful to me. I'm sure it was really helpful to all of our attendees. So if you haven't already typed your question to the chat box, go ahead and do that now, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. The first one comes from one mom. She was asking if you could clarify the related R again. How does that R work?
Well, yes, great question. Related is important because we want the learning event to take place. So in that example of video games that I gave, if I would have come in and said, that's it, you're not going on the sleepover this weekend, that is totally unrelated, and it feels like punishment to the child. And again, punishment being defined as blame, shame, and pain. So what happens is you become the bad guy. It's totally out of the blue, willy-nilly, doesn't make any sense, and you become the bad guy. And I cannot tell you how many parents I talk to will say, well, I've taken away the phone, I've taken away the video game privileges, I've taken away this, that, and the other. Pretty soon they run out of things to take away. The problem is they're not using consequences that are related to the specific behavior. We want to use a consequence that is related so the child learns the important lesson about that particular behavior. So Mary Grace, I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, definitely. You did. I have another question. Another mom is asking, she says that her 5-year-old has different child care providers on different days, and it's hard to keep everyone on the same page. And she was wondering if you have any tips on how to get all the child care providers on the same page and in agreement with implementing consequences.
Oh, that's a great question too. And again, it depends on who those child care providers are. It is more difficult if they are family members. You know, if you have in-laws or parents taking care of your little ones, that can be a little bit more challenging to get them on board. If they are, you know, folks that you hire to care for your kids, I think you can just be very clear about what your expectations are. And again, I would encourage you to go to some resources, on our website, positiveparenting-solutions.com. There's a lot of free training resources. You can have all of your child care providers go through those free training resources. But the other thing I would say is pick the 2 or 3 non-negotiables that are most important to you. So maybe it's around bedtime, maybe it's around how discipline is handled, maybe around eating, what they're allowed to eat or not allowed to eat. Pick 2 or 3 things that are non-negotiables. Make sure everybody is on the same page with those things. And if they will not be on the same page, I would say that's an indication that you kind of need to rethink the child care provider relationship, because it's your child, and you're not asking them to do everything just like you would at home, but it is not unreasonable for you to expect 2 or 3 things to be done consistently just like you would have them done.
Absolutely. Another mom is asking if you could give an example of the type of consequence you might give to a 4 or 5-year-old who will hit in an attempt to get his way.
Okay, great question. All right, hitting, and again, this is actually kind of the same answer if it's a younger child or, like a toddler or a 4 or 5-year-old. Again, the mom says they're doing the hitting to get their way, and typically when kids hit, we respond usually by like grabbing their hands or trying to stop the hitting, which really just kind of invites the power struggle, because then we're sort of in a test of wills physically with this child. So the minute the child starts to hit, what you want to do is disengage, back away immediately, walk out of the room. If it's a younger child, you happen to be holding the child, very calmly set the child down, no words, and walk out of the room. Now, what has to precede that, however, is the revealing in advance. So in a calm time, not when you or the child are upset, you'd talk about, it's not okay to hit. If you hit mommy, I'm going to turn around and walk out of the room. When you calm your body down and you're ready to talk to me, I'm happy to talk with you, but it's not okay to hit. So kind of reveal that in advance and then role play it. Role-playing is so important for younger kids because that's how they learn to use new behaviors. So role-play it with you being the mom and your child being himself, and then switch roles. Let your child play the parent and you pretend to be the hitter, and have your child walk away. So that helps him realize, okay, this is what's going to happen if I do this behavior again. And then every single time that hitting occurs, you walk away, don't say a word, turn around and walk away. Now again, after the child is calmed down, you want to sort of process that with him and talk about, all right, you seemed angry, you felt angry. Nothing wrong with feeling angry, but what you do with those feelings, what you did with those feelings is not okay. Hitting is not okay. So what can you do instead? And then practice and role play how your child can express those angry feelings in a different way. That's a big, long tangent, Mary Grace, but hopefully that gets to the issue.
I think it does. Now, this is a question sort of along the same lines, and I'm wondering if you would give a response that sort of has the same technique. If a child starts yelling or getting all bent out of shape with you after they've chosen, to take the consequence by not listening to what you wanted them to do in the first place, how would you react to that? Would it be similar?
Absolutely, yes. So again, if this yelling and sort of the verbal negotiating has been a repeated pattern of behavior, you can reveal in advance, remember yesterday when, you were unhappy with my decision about X and you started yelling at me or, whatever they were doing. Just need to let you know that that is not okay. And in the future, if that happens, I'm not going to respond. I'm going to turn around and walk away. Now, keep in mind, everyone, that's not letting the child get away with it. It is saying, I refuse to participate in this power struggle. Because remember, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to engage you, suck you into the power struggle. Think about it like a tennis match. If you and I were playing tennis and I hit the ball to you and you hit it back to me, then we have a game going. However, if I hit the ball to you and you let the ball drop and walk away, Now I don't have anybody to play with. So think about those verbal exchanges like a tennis match. It's basically them serving up a power struggle, and you have a choice. You can hit the ball back and engage with them, which gives that behavior a ton of attention and power, or you can choose to turn around and walk away and go about your business and leave the room. They may follow you around the room. That's okay. But remember, this will happen 2 or 3 or 4, maybe even 5 times. But if you are consistent in the way you respond to it, pretty soon they're going to realize, you know what, this behavior actually doesn't work anymore, and they'll move on to something else. So again, after the fact, when everybody's calmed down, then you can sort of process with them and talk it through more rationally and talk about what they could do differently in the future. But you do not want to engage in that power struggle. Don't hit the ball back so you have this big back and forth power struggle going on.
That's an excellent analogy, the tennis ball analogy. It makes so much sense. We have one mom, she's asking about sleep. She says her 4-year-old is giving her a hard time sleeping at night, and she wants to know if you could handle it in sort of the same way.
Oh, sleep is one of those topics that we could spend at least a full hour, maybe 2 hours on. So there's a lot that I'm not going to be able to get to in the answer to that question. However, keep in mind that sleep battles at night are the result of 2 things. Number one, in